this meeting is being recorded as of now, as I just pushed the button here. So we are going to have this recording available for future use. Again, we welcome you, and I wanted to share with you that if you had any questions, you could put them in the Q&A. They will be answered via technicians through text answers in the Q&A, or it might be answered live if we know that question will be answered as it comes up. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Matt. Matt is the lead technician of our awesome tech support team here at Taxware Systems. He is amazingly patient and loves to solve any challenges that come his way. When he isn't saving the day for Taxware clients, Matt is an avid collector and player of designer board games and is talented in video editing, music production, and online streaming. Many of you may have already spoken to Matt as you are getting things set up and prepared for the new tax season. So at this time, I welcome Matt and turn the time over to him. For the most part, your screen will show our program, and he will walk through that with you. Thank you.
All righty, thank you, Catherine. So to start off here, let's just do a brief overview for what we're going to be going through today. We're going to go through the website, how to download the software, just in case you haven't done that yet. It's pretty quick and easy. Then we'll go to your opening the individual 1040 program for the first time, making sure everything's set up correctly, and then going through your first return. To start off, let's go with the website. So once you get to taxwaresystems.com, you'll come to this page here, and you're going to click on this client portal button. Once you click on that client portal button, it's going to ask you to log in. And once you do, you'll see your programs that are available under the current program section. To get started with downloading the program, you're going to click on the program that you would like to download. As an example, I will download we'll do the depreciation program today. So we'll click on that. That's going to start a download. You'll need to run that download. Just downloading, it's not going to do anything. You actually need to do the installation. So clicking on that button down there, or if you're on Google, or if you're on Microsoft Edge or Firefox, it'll show up on the top right of your screen on a little down arrow, and you'll click on the name of the program. Doing so should open up your installer. Installer is very simple. You hit next, you hit next, you hit next, you hit install. After a few seconds, it'll install, and when it is finished, an icon will appear on your desktop. We're going to pretend in this case that you've gone through and downloaded and installed each of those programs. And then when you open up the 1040 for the first time, this is what it's going to look like. The first thing you'll want to do when you first install the program, if you're a new client, is make sure that you input your preparer and ERO information. To do that, you'll go here to preparer and ERO setup. You'll go into the preparer setup or the ERO information, whichever one you're doing, and you'll add that information in. To add a new preparer, you simply click the add button, and that will take you to this screen where you can put in your information. If you're a returning client, or then your information will already be brought over from the prior year. But if you need to make any changes to it before the season gets started, you'll go ahead and put in that information at the beginning of the year. Same thing with ERO information. You'll click on ERO information. You'll click on add, and you can add in your EFIN, and it'll automatically pull your ERO information down from Taxware. Okay. The next thing you'll want to check is the defaults and settings. Under the defaults and settings, this is where you're going to put in kind of how you want the program to behave, if there's anything specific that you want to have happen. For example, if you're in California, for example, the SDIs on the W-2s aren't enabled by default, so you'd want to turn on this checkbox down here to turn that on. The important things to take a look at in the very beginning, though, are the settings and data path. This is where all of your data is being saved. If you're on a network, you're going to want this to be your network location. If you save things to a cloud drive for cloud storage or cloud backups, you'll want this to go to your cloud backup location. If you're not sure where you want this to go or need this to go, I recommend calling technical support, and they can help you with deciding where this needs to go and what your options are. If you are on a single computer, just the one computer and that's it, then the default should suffice for you, and that you shouldn't need to change it. For returning clients, this will automatically get picked up from your prior year information. Next, we'll talk about the defaults, these defaults here, your default preparer and default ERO. You need to make sure that you set your default preparer and your default ERO at the very beginning of the tax season before you start any returns. If you forget to do that, it's not the end of the world, but it is a little annoying to go in and select the preparer and ERO manually on each of your returns. And what setting this does is when you make a new client or you recall a client from prior year, it's going to put that preparer and that ERO on that return as the default. Next, let's look at the billing setup. Under billing setup here, it should pull in your information from last year. And if you need to change that, let's say you wanted to add an extra $10 to your 1040 price, you can just type it in again. If you need to change multiple settings for your billing for this year, you can hold Shift and click in order to select multiple options, or you can Control click to select individual options that are not in a row. And if you select the amount here and type it in, so if I say $50, that'll change in all of the ones that I've selected at one time. So it doesn't have to be a very, you don't have to go in and fill out absolutely everything one at a time if you have a lot of forms that are going to be the same price. So for example, if these forms are maybe not used as often, I can go through and just set these to $10 each. Okay. As a reminder, the billing information here this is a default billing. It will not change any of the returns you have already started. Doing it from the settings here, you would have to go into the individual client themselves and change the billing on that particular client. And the reason for that is you don't want to change, in March, increase your prices a little bit in March, and then everyone in February suddenly owes $10 or $20 or however much you increased it by or decreased it by. You don't want to ruin those bills. So this default is used in the same way that the preparer and ERO defaults are used, in that once you start a return, it creates a copy of that and puts that into the return. Next, we'll look at print setup. Print setup's pretty basic. If there's anything you don't want to print, you can uncheck the print if required checkbox. As you can see here, I've unselected those for these things here. So I just get this normal archive copy. In fact, that's what I've named it here. But if I wanted to print a bill, that would be selected. Or let's say I wanted to, when I print out the archive copy, I want it to print out 2 copies of the 1040. I can select the number of copies here. I can change that to whatever number I'd want, and that's how many copies would print out. You can also change the forms for particular states. So I can go into California and say, oh, I only want to print I want to print out 2 copies of the 540, for example, when I print out a return. Down below, we have your default letters. That's all well and good. If you have, a lot of people tend to like our alternate client letter. So if you don't particularly like the default client letter, you can click this drop down and choose our alternate letter. We also have a default letter that's in Spanish. So if you are a Spanish speaker and you want to change it to that, or you deal mainly with Spanish speaking clients, then you can switch that to the Spanish letter. One thing of note here is the auto create PDF when printing complete returns. A lot of people forget to do archives of their returns as they go on. And if that's something that you're interested in, I highly recommend checking this box so that you automatically do that when you print the return. You don't even have to remember to do the archive. It'll happen when you do a physical print. Up here on the top left are some options that tend to be useful, especially when transferring tax returns via electronic means. So there's masked social security numbers and bank account numbers that will make it so only the last 4 digits of the social show up on the return. And same thing with the bank account number, it'll mask a portion of the bank account number, just replacing the numbers with X's. There's also the client copy checkbox. The client copy checkbox is a watermark that goes across the entire return that says client copy, do not file. That's a reminder to your client that, hey, you e-filed this return. You don't need to paper file the return that I'm handing you. It's happened in the past where, clients are doing the e-file, they do the e-file, they print out the return, they hand it to the client, and then the client goes and mails that in, even though they didn't need to. So doing this client copy watermark can be useful if that's happened to you before. And then lastly, the protect PDF with the social security number. That means when you archive a return, it'll automatically put the last 4 digits of the social security number as a password for that PDF in case you're transferring the PDF digitally and you want to put that extra layer of security so that you make sure only the person who owns the return is the one being able to open it. Okay. I'm not going to cover every single setting, but those are the main ones that you'll want to look at the beginning of the year is your billing setup, your default preparer and default ERO. Those are very important. And then that your settings and data path is set correctly. Down below, you'll want to just select the settings and defaults that make sense for you. For example, again, if you're in a Spanish-speaking area and by default you want to select the language preference on the 1040, there's a box where you can select which language preference you want to be Spanish. You can check this box and it'll automatically make that selection whenever you make a new client or recall a client in from a prior year. There's also a checkbox here that's pretty useful, the verify social security numbers, routing numbers, and accounting numbers by keying them in twice. If you're butterfingers like me and frequent or dyslexic and you frequently mix up numbers, checking this box is highly recommended because that means whenever you put in a social, you have to put in the social again just to make sure you got it right. So that's a useful checkbox there. Down below here, we've already mentioned the California checkbox. This is for when you're putting in W-2s. It'll include the SDI as an automatic calculation and include it in the wizard mode, which we'll go over in a short amount of time here. Below that, we have the other settings. Here, I would say the most important one is going to be this bottom one, 42, where we allow you to use an electronic signature without a signature pad. So even if you don't have a Topaz signature pad, which are those pads where if you go into the bank and you have to sign something and they've got the little plastic screen where you sign your name, you can use that with Taxware, but if you don't have that and you have a touch screen or you want the client to sign with a mouse, you can check this box. And then when you go into the 8879 to have them sign, they'll sign it with the mouse for the electronic signatures. Down below here, the last one I'll mention is this option here, the autosave PDF file of acknowledgement. This will, when you get acknowledgements in, acknowledgements being the message from the IRS that your return was accepted or rejected. When you get those in, it'll automatically create a PDF copy of it and save it to your archive folder. That way, if something happens and you have a backup of it, you don't even need to open the program to look at your acknowledgements. You can just look at the PDF copies. Okay. Quickly before we go into the actual return, I do also want to jump into our miscellaneous features and just talk about the backups. It's highly recommended that you are doing backups at least once a week during tax season, preferably a little bit more often than that. And even after tax season, doing backups, once a month or so. Backups are incredibly important. Computers are, while mostly reliable, when they fail, there's not really a lot you can do to recover data from them, depending on how they failed. Your backup is your only line of defense against things like floods or fires, theft, just catastrophic failures of your hard drive, you want to have a backup. Every year we get somebody who calls in and they say their computer died or their computer was stolen, and they need their information. And if they don't have a backup, there's not anything that Taxware can do for you in that case. So do make sure you're doing your backups. The backup system is very easy. You'll have an external hard drive. In this case, I have a D drive set up with my backups. When I push the backup button, that will create a backup, and I can view or add a schedule for the backups here. Scheduling is pretty easy. Do I want to have a backup every day or every week or every month? In this case, I have it set for every day, every 2 days. And then this one does not include the PDFs. It's just going to be the Taxware data. PDFs are kind of big, so you don't always want to include them, but you can have a separate one just for PDFs if you want like that. It's not hard to set up. Okay. What this backup does is when you close out of the program, it's going to give you a prompt that says there's a backup waiting. Do you have time to do a backup? And if you do, you'll click yes, and it'll do a backup. Typically doesn't take very long, maybe 5 minutes or so at the most. That's usually during the end of the season, once you have a few hundred to 1,000 clients. All right, let's get to the fun bits, actually putting in information and putting in a return. You can make a new return by clicking on New Client here. That will allow you to put in all the basic information for your client, but most of your clients are going to be returning clients, so we're going to go to the Recall Prior section and recall a client. When we go to Recall Prior, we'll see a list of our prior year clients. In this case, I'm going to recall Mr. and Mrs. Client here. This screen will come up. This screen is asking you what you want the client ID to be. If you don't have a particular filing system that needs a specific client ID, I recommend just leaving it at what the system pulls up here. So they're going to go in order, starting from number 1, then to number 2, 3, 4, the next highest one that's available. If you skip ahead and you say, I want one that's at 1500, then after you do that, the next client you make is going to be 1501, then 1502, then 1503, etc. So I typically will just leave it at 1 and go from there. Next, we bring up for a prior year client, it'll bring up the driver's license information. By law, we can't automatically transfer over the driver's license information. It has to be reviewed before it can be pulled over. So we have here on the bottom last year's driver's license information, and then spots to input it for this year. So in this case, I'm just going to recall from prior year. It'll bring that over after I've reviewed it, and then I can select that this is indeed a driver's license. Next is something specific for the 2021 tax year, which is the EIP3 amount. The EIP3, that's the stimulus checks, the third stimulus check that came out. Your clients should have received a notice back when they got that stimulus check. It's been quite a while since then, so I imagine a lot of people are going to not be, they won't have that information. The program will give you an estimate for prior year case where it's saying, hey, last year, based on the income they had, they should have received a stimulus check of this amount. Now, that's not always going to be the case. The IRS might have adjusted it slightly, especially if they're a higher earner, but not past the threshold. So you'll want to actually get the amount from the letter. This is just a recommendation that's saying, hey, it should be about this amount, assuming that they've received it. If they didn't receive anything, then you would put in a 0, and it's going to calculate most likely a very high refund for them. So you got to be careful, because you don't want to put a 0 in here unless you know they didn't actually receive anything. You want to put the amount they actually received. I'm going to put a 0 in here now. This person has received the amount, but I want to show you where to go and find that in case you put in the wrong number. So I'm going to put that in incorrectly at this point. Next, we have the advanced child tax credit payments. This is for changes from last year's child tax credit, where they sent out child tax credit payments throughout the year, the advanced child tax credit. this is where you'll put in the amount that they received. In this case, I'm going to put in that they received $1,000 and that the number of children used to determine that was one child, the number of children claimed on their last year's tax return. There's a reminder here that that's what it's for. So even though you might have a child that is aged out of being the child, oh no, they increased the age limit, so that shouldn't be a case. So yeah, it should just be the one. The only time you would have a number of children different from last year's tax return, or not from last year's tax return, but different than the current year's return if a child was born. Even though they have 2 children this year, you would still just put 1 child if the child was born this year, or if a child passed away, even though they have 0 children, you'd still put 1 child for the number of children that was used to determine the ACTC. Okay. Once we've filled out that information, we should be put into here. What is happening? I think I took too long and it doesn't like me anymore. Sorry, one moment. All right, sorry about that. So let's go back to our basic information here. Okay, so here there's the basic information. So if we're recalling a prior year client, all this information is going to come over automatically. It's going to be their first name, last name, basic information, address, all that. If they need to make any changes, they would make changes now. Let's pretend we're making changes, but I'm actually going to set up something for a bit later, and we're going to put something here that's a mistake. We'll come back to that. You can also put in their dependent information down here. So if they needed to add a dependent, we can click the add button and we can put in, the new person here. Oops, that's the date of birth. So we could add an additional child here if we needed to. If you've made a mistake on any kind of screen that looks like this, where there's a list of things and you need to remove one, we can single click on the particular client we need to remove, or in this, whatever it happens to be that we need to remove. And then we can click on the delete key on our keyboard and delete the thing that we're trying to remove. So I'm just going to leave it at the one dependent here, but that's how you would add a dependent and then remove a dependent if you made a mistake. If you need to change their phone number or driver's license information, you can click phone and driver's license information here. That'll change that information. We have the driver's license information we pulled in from earlier, and we also have the taxpayer identity protection PIN. If your client in the past has been subject to identity theft, or they've compromised their social security number for some reason, the IRS might give them an identity protection PIN. I believe this year they also might be allowing people to claim identity protection PINs even if they're not the victim of identity theft or fraud. So you might see it a little bit more often this year, but they can put in the PIN number here. This is required to be there if they have one, and you'll get a reject saying that there's no identity protection PIN if they needed it and they are missing it. Okay. If we scroll down here, there's also some special filing categories. If a client is the dependent of another, for example, we can select that in the special filing categories here. It's very important that for children who are dependents of others and you're doing their tax return, that you select this box. If you don't select this box, then the parent will not be able to claim the child on their return, or this child's return might get rejected because that this box is not checked. So be careful with this one. It's important to note that a lot of credits are also disabled when you have the dependent of another based on the tax law. So things like EIC, child tax credit, etc., those will not be available to those who are dependent of another. So if you're not getting those credits and you expect that you should be, one of the places to check is this special filing categories to make sure they're not the dependent of another. Okay. Lastly, on this page, we'll cover the change in language preference. So we talked about that checkbox in the defaults and settings earlier. The one that changes it to Spanish, you can manually change that here to Spanish, or if you have that checked, or to any other language really, but if you have it checked to Spanish or by default and you want to change it back to English, you can come down here and switch it back to English, or vice versa. If you're in a normally non-Spanish or any of these other languages speaking communities, then you can come down and change it. You don't need to set this if they're not having a change, by the way. It'll continue to be whatever it was last year for them. That carries over from the prior year. Next up is where you want to go from here. When you push OK from this screen, it's going to take you to whatever you've set as your default input or line input or forms and schedules screen. In this case, I have forms and schedules set as my default. But if you have line input, when you push OK, it's going to take you to the line input screen instead. Going back to this page here, the line input is what looks like the 1040. It allows you to just walk through as though you were doing a paper 1040 and go through and put in information as you go. Whereas forms and schedules is for if you know there's a particular form or schedule you want to add, it's usually best to go into forms and schedules to get to that location as quickly as possible. We'll start off with line input. So from line input, you can see here, it looks like the, especially if I uncheck that box, it looks a lot like the 1040. And you can go in and just double check at a glance what the 1040 looks like, the final numbers and all of that. If I check this box, it'll hide this basic information section, which while nice to look at, isn't always useful. So I choose to keep that hidden. So it's easier to look at just the data itself. Let's say we wanted to do a form from here. Let's say we wanted to put in a W-2. I can single click on the button here to go to the W-2 section. I can also click on the blue box over here if I want to go that way. So I'm going to click on this button here. Okay, I can recall prior year W-2s. In this case, I did have a W-2 in the prior year. I didn't put in the employer information. But if you did put in employer information, it would automatically come over. You can also, when you're making a W-2, look at employer information that you've done for other clients. Oftentimes, if you have a big employer in town, then a lot of people are going to come into your office with the same employer information on their W-2, like Walmart, or if there's some big factory there, then they'll all be from the same factory. And so you can click on this employer identification number section, push the F5 key on your keyboard, and it'll bring up the employer lookup, where any employer that you've put in before, it'll bring up that information automatically. So I can double click on that and it's automatically put in all that information. It'll also do that if you just type in the employer identification number. So if I were to type in 00123456 and push enter, then it would automatically bring up Widgets Incorporated here for this client. So I don't have to type in this information every single time. When I hit enter here, I'm going to go to the next blue location that's in the list. So you'll notice that this line here is blue, this line here is blue, these are blue, but some of the other lines are not blue, they're white. That's what's called wizard mode. And you can turn wizard mode on and off through this button up here on the top left. So that's off, that's on. And what wizard mode does is it means that when you push enter from a location, it's going to take you to the next available location for quick W-2 input. So if I was to put the wages in here, let's say they made, I don't know, $26,000, push enter. it automatically brings down the 26,000 to the Medicare wages and tips. And if I push enter again, it fills out most of the rest of the information here. The only thing left to put in is the withholdings. So let's go ahead and put in the withholdings. We'll say, I don't know, $1,000. You'll notice since I've checked that box in the defaults and settings for the SDI that the California SDI is also automatically calculated and entered. So that's a nice bonus. So I hit enter, puts me down to the box 12 codes. I'd be able to put in any box 12 codes. And then after that, it's going to take me to the state input where I can put in the state amounts. So we can put in how much the state withholdings are. If you ever need to get to a place that's not in this blue section and you are in wizard mode, you don't need to turn off wizard mode. You can just go ahead and click into a particular box, type in the number, hit enter, and you'll go to the next blue location. Okay. So that is the entering in a W-2. It's pretty straightforward. When you have wizard mode on, you can get really fast at entering in these W-2 informations because all you're putting in is EIN, wages, hit enter a couple of times, withholdings, hit enter a couple of times, put in the state withholdings, you're done, right? For basic W-2s. So it can be very quick. Oh, I should explain how I'm able to go in between screens so quickly. So normally you have to click into boxes in order to type, and then everyone's familiar with that's how computers work. And in all the Taxware's programs, we have what's called a mouse-free selection. So you might notice this little box down here, this mouse-free selection number. And you might also notice that there's all these lines that have these bracket numbers. So next to wages, even though this is line number 1 on the form, we have a bracket 12 here. And what that bracket 12 does is allows you to get into this field to type in this amount without ever having to click into that box. So let's say I'm clicked into the employer identification box, and I want to get to wages. Instead of pushing enter a bunch or moving my mouse over and clicking on it, I can push the asterisk key on my number pad. That will select mouse-free selection. So pushing that button will take me down to this mouse-free. So right now the cursor is here. I push asterisk. Now I'm in the mouse-free selection. And if I type in the number that I want to go to, in this case 12, so 1, 2, it takes me into that wages, tips, and other compensation. And I'll show you where that can be useful a little bit later on in the demonstration here. But one thing that is pretty useful is instead of having to move your mouse all the way down to the corner to push OK, you can push asterisk and then either type 99 or /, and it'll push the OK button for you. So here, I'm going to leave my mouse in the middle of the screen. I'm going to push asterisk / to get out of there. And then I'm going to push / again, and I get out of there. So it's like me pushing the OK button twice without ever having to move my mouse or think about where my mouse is on the screen. It can really speed up your input speed when you do that. So we've entered in a W-2 here. Let's go check some of the other things that we can do. A lot of the forms and schedules have been moved to schedules 1 through 3 in the past few years. To get to schedules 1 through 3, you can go into the 1040 and find the line that's appropriate. So here I can click on 10 to get to schedule 1. I can click on 17 to get to schedule 2, or I can click on line 20 to get to schedule 3. I prefer to go to forms and schedules, and this year they're put right up here at the top, schedule 1, schedule 2, schedule 3. So if I click on schedule 1, I can go here and I can put in any information that might be relevant for schedule 1. So really easy to get into those locations now. You can also double click on these forms and schedules used on the left-hand side to quickly navigate. So if I wanted to go back to the W-2s to make an edit or to add another W-2, I can click on W-2 listing and it'll take me back to the W-2 section. So a couple of navigation tricks to help you out there. Next, let's take a look at the Schedule A. So we're going to go into line number 4 here, Schedule A for itemized deductions. Couple of things I wanted to show you here with Schedule A. It's not the Schedule A specifically, but there's this thing called Live Preview. that we have. If you look down here at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that it says F12 is live preview. If I push F12, then this little screen is going to come up and it's going to show me a preview of the Schedule A. I'm going to move that to the side there. And then we'll go ahead and scoot that over a little, scoot the program over a little. And if I type in a number here, it should put an amount in. So you can see it automatically will update the preview as I'm typing things in. So if I change that to 1,000, that's changed to 1,000. If I go down here, put in some home mortgage interest for, I don't know, $2,500, that'll automatically populate on the preview. So if you're the kind of person who likes to look at the form after putting in every little thing, or maybe you have a forward-facing monitor that's pointing at your client, and so they can see you enter in stuff on the form as you go, this can be a very useful tool for that. Another thing on the Schedule A that I want to point out is these little blue triangles that you might see kind of all over the place on the inputs. So like here, medicines and drugs, they have this little blue triangle. If I hover over that triangle, it says an overflow statement is available for this field, and I can hit the F3 key to access it. So if I click into this box and I hit F3 on my keyboard, it's going to bring up this overflow schedule where I can type in individual amounts that'll add up to go and put on that particular input. So I might say, Tylenol, $200, insulin, $2,000, etc. And as you can see, it's totaling up the amounts that I'm putting in here. And I can actually preview or print this overflow schedule if a client needs it, or if you want to keep that for your records. When I push OK, it's put in the total amount from that overflow schedule. Okay. So in addition to that, I think that covers everything I wanted to cover on the Schedule A. Schedule A still isn't used as much these days with the much higher standard deduction rates, but if you do use it, maybe those tips will come in handy. So let's go ahead and get out of live preview here, and we'll maximize the screen again. And now let's go to the Schedule C. So if you wanted to go to Schedule C from line input, we would need to go into the Schedule 1 and then into the business income or loss from Schedule C, and we'd get into the Schedule C. From forms and schedules, you can just go straight to Schedule C. But from either of them, you can also click on this handy button up here on the top right, this forms search. So if you're ever not sure where a form is located, or you're in line input and you don't want to go look for it, you can click forms search up here, and I can just start typing in maybe Schedule C, and it should come up with the Schedule C information here. Maybe I don't know the name of the Schedule C, so I can just start typing in business, and then it should bring up, Schedule C business income and the other things that have business in their name. If I double click on that, it should bring me into the screen for Schedule C. In this case, it's asking me, do I want to recall one of my prior year Schedule Cs automatically, because I had Schedule Cs on this return last year. I'm going to click on yes, and then I'm going to select which one I want to bring over. So let's say I want to bring over New Line Home Cinema. So I'll double click on that one. So that's brought in all that information from last year. I don't have to type that information in again. On the Schedule C specifically, let's take a look at this qualified business income. You'll also see this on Schedule E. If the business, or for Schedule E, the rental is part of qualified business income for the QBI deduction, then you'll want to make sure that this box here, eligible for qualified business income deduction, is checked yes. If this is not checked yes, then they're not going to get that extra 20% tax credit for the QBI. Down here, we'll put in some income. So let's say they've made $10,000 from this. And then we can put in some expenses. We'll put in, I don't know, $1,000 in advertising, $200 in commissions, $400 in rent. And then let's say we wanted to use actually rent is a bad idea. So let's get rid of that. We'll put that in repairs instead. Let's say we wanted to use the business use of home. Let's say this person is working from home. If you wanted to do the simplified method for business use of home, you would put in the information down here. And if you wanted to do the full-on 8829 for business use of home, you'd click on this button here, this ... button. Let's say that you went into the 8829 though, and then you're like, oh wait, no, I want to do the simplified method. So you go back and you put in the simplified method. Except for now, nothing is showing up for the expenses for the business use of home. The reason for that is that because you've gone into the 8829, the program thinks that you're using this instead of the simplified method. So that's why we've put this button here. So if you're ever putting in the simplified method for the business use of home and it's not showing up, click on this button, remove 8829, and you should see that the expenses for the use of home show up after that. In general, that's how the program works. If you ever go into a form, it's going to assume that you want to do that form. Let's say, for instance, I go into the 2441 for child dependent care. So let's say I go in here and then I leave going, oh, I didn't want to click that one. I misclicked. I meant the 2555 or something like that. You'll see here on my forms and schedules used on the left-hand side that I still have that form 2441 because I entered that form. In order to get rid of that, you'll need to clear that form or schedule from the return. To do that, you go down to line number 88 here, clear forms and schedules. It's also on line input at the bottom of the screen, 88, clear forms and schedules. That'll bring up a list of forms that are clearable, and you can double click on it to remove that form from the return. Okay. Let's see, let's pretend that we're done here. I don't have anything else to put in, and I'm just gonna push the OK button. So the program's automatically going to warn me in this case because I have a dependent, I have low income, I'm eligible, I might be eligible for the EIC. So the program's going to remind you if you make a mistake and could get like the potentially big credits, but you haven't put in information in them, specifically the EIC and the child tax credit it'll warn you about. So let's go ahead and follow the program's advice here and go do that EIC. So we'll go ahead and say yes. Do I want to carry the basic information? I want to say yes to that. So it's carried the information in here. Now, little client here is part of the EIC. One thing that's important for the EIC in the last 2 years is this 2019 earned income. This is a measure to try and help with people who have lost their jobs due to the pandemic. And what it is if their income for the current tax year is lower than their 2019 earned income, and their 2019 earned income would give them a higher EIC amount than their current income, it's going to use the 2019 earned income instead. If I recalled from prior this client from 2019 and then from 2020 to 2021, this will automatically populate. In this case, I just made this client in 2020 and brought it to 2021. So this amount is not here. So generally, it's good to put in that 2019 earned income if you can, because it can only benefit your client and give them a higher refund amount. So I just want to bring attention to that. Like if you can put this in, you absolutely should when you're doing EIC. In this case, we'll say that this client only earned $5,000 for that, which they should get a higher EIC from the amount they have currently. So it's not going to use this, but if that amount was higher, then it might use that instead. Also of note here, you'll see that this due diligence button is red. Let's ignore that for now. So immediately I've been put into the due diligence anyway. The program wants me to do due diligence. So I'm going to ignore it and I'm going to push OK. I'm going to push OK again. It's put me back into the due diligence here because it's really wanting me to do this due diligence. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to say no, exit. So it's warned me several times now that I haven't done due diligence. I haven't done due diligence. And then I'm back on this screen. I push OK. And it's warning me again that I haven't done due diligence. You need to do the due diligence for your clients if it requires you to. It'll show up red if it's there. You will not be able to e-file a return without doing the due diligence. And if you paper file a return without doing the due diligence, you will most likely get in trouble with the IRS in a pretty big way. So let's go ahead and do the due diligence. So for due diligence here, it's just a series of pretty easy questions that you have to ask your client and put the answers in. If you've recalled the client from the prior year, so you know the client and you know that nothing's changed, you can recall from prior year the answers you had last year. So if I click recall prior, it's got this message saying, hey, be sure that you want to do this. I'm going to click yes, and it'll fill in that information automatically. In this case, I didn't have those checked last year, so I have to check those. We'll put little client on EIC, and we'll click due diligence for them. Again, here, I would normally have to put in all the information if they're a new client, but since I'm recalling them from a prior year, I can click recall prior. I'll click yes. And it puts in the information for that one as well. Okay. The only thing that we don't have is the Schedule C. So let's go ahead and enter in the Schedule C. And I want to show you that the mouse-free selection can be pretty useful in this case. So let's say I want to enter in this information as quickly as possible. I can put in 02, 01, 17, 02, 18, 02, 05, 04. And then this is new client is there. And that's the due diligence done for Schedule C. But using that mouse-free selection is a lot faster than me going and clicking yes, and then clicking yes, and then clicking no. It can be quite quick to do that mouse-free selection to move things around. Okay. So let's look at our 1040 here. Everything looks good. Everything looks good. Oh, wait a second, they did get the recovery rebate credit. So if you remember, I said, oh, they need to, I was going to put in a 0 there as a mistake. So in this case, I put in a 0 to show where you can access this. You can access this directly from the line input. So if I click this button, I can put this in and change it. Or I can go into, if I'm in forms and schedules, I can go into 84 here, other income adjustments and payments. And then there's a line here for the recovery rebate credit. 84, the other income adjustments and payments, is also just useful in general for anything that doesn't really have a place that goes on the return, or kind of things that you might not be sure where they go. So things like unemployment compensation go here. There's a link to other income in this area. There's places for the estimated tax payments or federal withholdings. So you can do a lot of things from this screen. So let's go into there and change that. They actually did get their $4,200 in recovery rebate, so they're not going to get that credit. Okay, so we're now finished with the return. I'm going to push the OK button, and we're here on the summary menu. On the summary menu, we can have a breakdown here. We have the federal refund here. We don't have a California balance or refund because we haven't gone into California to do the return. In general, you're going to do the federal return first, make sure that that federal return is complete. And when you're finished, you're going to hop into the state, and then it's going to carry everything from the Fed into the state for you to complete. And then you just have to do any state specific things, which depends on which state you're from. The other thing we have here is the validity checks. You'll see this red dot here, which means there's something wrong with the return that will cause the return to get rejected if I were to send it as it is. I'm going to click on that validity checks button, and it'll show us what the error messages are. Okay, so we've got quite a few error messages. There's two different kinds of validation errors. There are internal validation errors. That's these ones here. These are error messages that Taxware has put in specifically. They tend to be in plain language. You know, taxpayer's city was not entered, but it's required, or the taxpayer city has invalid characters because it has no characters. And then the zip code is missing and all of that. However, the ones on the right are from what are called schema files. And they're basically the federal IRS's instructions for how to prepare a return for electronic filing. And it involves more what the program is doing behind the scenes in creating this XML. And this XML is basically what the IRS sees when you send a return in. They don't actually get a printout of the return like you see when you print it out. They get this data that the computer can read. And so we have two schema validation errors. It'd be pretty easy to fix these from over here, but I want to point out how these errors on the right-hand side are formed and how to read them. So this first error, you have three parts to every validation error for schema validation error. There's the error message, which is this portion here. There's the XPath, which is this portion here. And then there's the location of the error, which is this portion here. The validation error is the most important. That's going to tell you what is wrong. In this case, it's saying that the address has an invalid element. This says invalid child element. That just has to do with how the data is structured. This has nothing to do with dependence or anything like that. This is talking about the data structure. So you can read this as the element US address has an invalid element state abbreviation code in the return. When it says in namespace, that means in the return somewhere. And then it gives a list of possible elements expected. So what this is saying is that, hey, I've hit the state abbreviation code, but I should have hit one of these things, either the second address line or the city name. If there's multiple things it's expecting, it's always expecting the last one in the list. Or typically it would be expecting the last thing in the list. So in this case, the city is missing. If you remember, I went and deleted the city when we first went into the basic information, and this is why, to show you what this message looks like. So let's go fix that. So we're going to go in. Let's say we didn't know where to fix that. Like it could be a city anywhere. It could be a city in the Schedule C. It could be a city in the Schedule E or something like that. That's where the XPath comes in. The XPath tells you where the error message is. So in this case, the error message is getting hit from the filer. So that's directly on the basic information, and then the US address. So the address on the basic information is where we're looking. So let's go to basic information. And yep, we are missing the city. So let's put in the city, and we'll go back to the summary menu. If we look at the validity checks now we have a different validation error message here. This one is saying that the zip code element is invalid. The value 9101 is invalid according to its data type. That makes sense. The zip code needs 5 digits. So it needs, we've obviously mistyped the zip code in this case. Where is that located? Again, that's on the basic information, the filer, and then the US address, and then the zip code. So let's go fix that. So we will fix that here. We'll go back to the summary menu and look at the validation errors. So we got one validation error left, and this is saying that the employee's US address. So it's the same message we got before. I thought we fixed that already. But the XPath here, this says that we are looking for the IRS W-2. So when we went into the W-2, it automatically copied over the employee information. And so it copied over that bad information. So we need to go and make sure that that gets fixed as well. So let's go to the W-2. We'll scroll down. We can see here, yep, that employee city is missing, and yep, that zip code is missing. We can push the copy button to copy that over. Okay. All right, so now on the right-hand side, there's no more schema errors. There's this warning here saying that it found a schema error the last time it was in, but if we leave and go back in, then that's going to go away because it's just remembering the last time that it was in there. So that's cleared. The last two we have are these Form 8879 errors, and that's talking about the signature documents, the 8879. So in this case, the PIN number is missing. The PIN number is something that gets automatically added once you preview or print the 8879. So let's go and do that. We're going to go into the eFile menu here on the summary menu, so eFile. And here is the eFile screen for single e-filing. Here you can do a number of things. You can print the 8879, the signature copy. So if we preview this, we can see here it's put in their information. If I had that option for masking social security numbers on, this would not be masked. The reason for that is that this is the signature document, and the signature document is only for the taxpayer, or I'm sorry, the tax preparer. And so it's for your records as the tax preparer. If the social security numbers and bank account number was masked on the 8879, then it would be useless to you for when the IRS comes to do an audit, because they would say, "Oh, how do I know this is for this, particular taxpayer?" If the social security numbers are masked on there. So just a note on that. We do get that question quite often. This will also have the paid preparers due diligence information, so that'll be there as well. And then you can print this out and hand it to your clients in order for them to sign it, again, for your records, or you can deliver it to them through whatever digital means you want, whether that's through Taxcom or Adobe Sign or email, for them to sign and return to you. Or you can print it out and they can sign it in person if they're in person. Once you click on that preview button, it's going to change the status from previously it was set at no status, and it'll set it to transmit. Once that happens, you are able to e-file this return. Once you, to e-file this return, you would click on this button up here, A to A e-file, and that sends off the return once e-file actually opens up, which I believe the IRS has said is on the 24th. So pretty soon here. This button over here, transmit 4868. Let's say you don't think this client's going to be ready by the time the deadline comes around, and you want to send an extension. You would transmit the 4868 to send off an extension for them. Also from this screen, you can do bank products and bank applications. I'm not going to get into that. We have an entirely separate video on how to do bank products and how to do that. Offer those products to your client on our website under the video tutorials section. Okay. So now if we come back to the main screen or the summary menu here, we can see that indeed we are green, which means everything's good to go. We check our validity checks. We got no errors on the right, no errors on the left. Everything's good to go. So if we were to send this now, the program would not stop you from sending it. The only thing that might come back are rejects based on database errors, such as if the social security number is incorrect. There's no way for Taxware to check. We don't have a list of social security numbers for everybody in the US. Nobody has that, unfortunately, other than the IRS. So you still might get rejects based on things like that. But the validity checks cuts out, I would say, 90% of rejects that are possible just from making mistakes, like simple typos and missing data and things like that. Again, to e-file for a single client, you would send an e-file through here. But if you wanted to, let's say, go the whole day and get everybody's returns and then just send them all off at once, that's called batch e-filing. And the way you would do that is by going back to the main menu. So we're going to exit the return here, and we would go to this batch e-file menu. So on batch e-file, you have some options. You have transmit returns, get acts. We're going to click on transmit returns. And you can see that since we've printed the 8879 for our client, that it's already set here in these returns selected to be transmitted. You would also find returns not selected to be transmitted, anything that was set to pending, meaning that you've started the return, but you haven't finalized things by getting the signature document printed. Or you can also just set it to all of your returns or all returns that are not accepted. So you can see a list of returns. Any client that's on the right-hand side will get transmitted when you click the transmit button. Any client that's on the left-hand side will not get transmitted when you click the transmit button. That's why it has the little thing at the top here. After you transmit, it'll give you a little log that you can print off that shows you a list of all the returns that you've transmitted. All right. So that is batch e-file. And that's actually pretty much the entire return. So again, just a recap, you would select the client, put in their basic information, Go to forms and schedules or line input, your choice, and fill out each form and schedule that that client needs. Once the federal return is complete, you would go into your state portion and fill out your state information, which is pretty much the same as the Fed portion. You would come back, do a validity check, and then e-file the return. All right. So yeah, that is it for that. So we do have a question here from the audience. It says, how do you have the client sign the return and the preparer? So that's a good question. So on the summary page, if you're trying to have them sign the return because you're trying to do a paper file for the return, then you would print out the return, or you can preview the return and save the preview, or you can archive the return and email it or send it through Adobe Sign or through Taxcom or whatever your digital sending management is. You would go through there. So I can archive the return as well. So let's say I archive the return and I want to send that off through Adobe Sign or through Taxcom. I would click Support, open PDF archive folder. That's going to bring up this folder, and it has my PDF that I've pulled in here, or that I've just created, and I can send that off to the client to get signed, and I can sign it myself, and then I'd be able to paper file it. Do note that you don't have the client doesn't have to sign the return if they are doing electronic filing. They only have to sign the 8879, the signature document. The signature document on the 8879 actually replaces their signature requirements on the return for the digital copy. So that's what this whole block of text is essentially saying, is that, hey, I'm replacing my signature here with this PIN number that's going to be used in the digital file. So do keep that in mind. It's not necessary to actually sign the paper return. Okay. So we have another question. How do I set the return to open under line input as your preference? So the very first time you open the program, it's going to, like you open a return and you push OK from the basic information screen, it's going to ask you what your preference is. Is it line input or is it forms and schedules? And whatever you select there, it's going to use that from then on. Let's say you make the wrong choice though. Like if I push OK, I go to the forms and schedules. Let's say I don't want that to happen anymore. I want to go to the line input. I've decided I don't like forms and schedules very much. They're not my friends. So I'll go to the main menu and I'll go to defaults and settings. And then I'll go to line number 15 here, input method, and I can change it from forms and schedules to line input. Now, if I go back into our client and I push OK from the basic information screen, it takes me to the line input. Okay, we got another question, which was, does Taxware have an e-signature module or not? We do, kind of. We have what's called Taxcom, and Taxcom is a separate software that you'd be able to purchase. I'm sure sales has more information. We do have more information on both our website and the Taxcom website, taxcom.net, that can be used to send and receive things like W-2s and signature documents. It allows the client to sign directly on either their phone or their computer the documents and then have them sent back to you. You can message your clients on Taxcom. There's video conferencing on Taxcom. I believe we had an entire Taxcom webinar that goes over all the benefits of Taxcom and kind of how it works. And so I'd recommend watching that. That's available on our blog. Okay. Are there any other questions? I'll wait a couple of seconds here. So we got a question about if we're going to have a letter format seminar. I don't believe so. We have a video tutorial that's on the website for the letter formatter. And if you have questions specifically on the letter formatter, I'd recommend you call in. Letter formatting is a little bit difficult because it's everyone wants their own way of doing things. So it's hard to do a comprehensive video on it. But the basics are in the video that's on the tutorial on the website. And then anything that's more specific, you can feel free to give our techs a call and we can go over that with you. We have another question here. How does the tax planning module work? So tax planning, when you are doing a return, you can go into tax planning, usually from the prior year, in order to plan out the taxes. So if I click on tax planning here, it's going to say it's not available yet because it's, again, from the prior year. So once this is available later on in the year, what you'll be able to do is go into here to kind of get to put in any changes that they might have for their 2022 return, and then it'll give you an estimate for what their 2022 taxes would look like. I believe we also have a video tutorial on the tax planning on the website. Can I show how to e-sign with a Topaz systems pad? I actually do not have a Topaz signature pad on my computer right now, so I can't actually show that. But what you would do is you would come to the e-file screen and click electronically sign. As long as your Topaz pad is plugged in and it's available with, it's recognized by your computer, it should automatically work. You'll click electronically sign, and then a series of screens will come up that show you how to sign that. We got another question, multiple states. So if you have multiple states, let's say I have California, so I'll go into California here. I'm going to ignore everything that's on here just to show you kind of what it's about. So I've added California as a state now. If I wanted to add a secondary state, I would just click add here on secondary states, and then I would select the state that I want to put in. I'm not sure which ones are available just yet. Looks like Utah is. So I can put in Utah as a state, and then it'll show up here. California is my primary state, then Utah is the secondary state. The primary and secondary state is not really a distinction that is made between the states or between the IRS. It's just kind of useful to know that, hey, this person is from California, or this person is from Utah, whatever happens to be in here. If you overwrite this, let's say I put in Utah here, it's not going to delete the California return. It's actually just going to move that down as California is now a secondary state. Okay. So there was a question that said, was the new client process basically the same as this? And the answer is yes. The new client process is exactly the same as this, except for you actually have to put in the basic information. So if I click on new client and put in this, I have to put in all of their basic information. I can show that really quick. Put in their test information, social security number. Didn't put in. There we go. I put in their basic information on this screen, and then once I'm finished there, I'm on the basic information. I can go from there. So pretty much exactly the same. Okay. Can I briefly run through the 1040X? Unfortunately, I can't run through the 1040X. I don't think it's available yet. It comes out a little bit later in the year. But I do believe we have information on that we've sent out before in the newsletters, as well as if you just want to go through it, you can give us a call and we can go through that. How to use the W-2 barcode scanner. So the way a barcode scanner works is a barcode scanner is essentially a keyboard. If you have a 2D barcode scanner, then on the program, what you can do is when you're making a new client, you can click this button here at the top that says that they have a 2D barcode, and you would scan the W-2 in order to put that in, and it'll just automatically put all the information in it and get their their name, social security number, their address from that information, and put it automatically onto the return. Once you actually have the return set up through the barcode scanner, you can add in additional W-2s when you go into the W-2 input. Oops, I went one step too far. You would click on the button here that says scan a W-2, and you would scan the W-2 and it would input the W-2. Okay. So I believe that's all the questions that I'd answer here. Anything else you can think of, Catherine?
No, thanks, Matt. You've done a great job. Thank you very much. I did want to mention, we have, while we were in this webinar, a very important email from Taxware Systems went out to all of our clients. Now, if that is not something that you are getting, emails from Taxware, you need to make sure that you have whitelisted us or done whatever you need to do in your email client to make sure that our emails show up as a priority. Today, more details about the e-file start and what IRS calls hub testing was just sent to everybody's email inbox about probably right at the beginning of this webinar. So look for that today, and other emails come out. And then also important messages are shown there on the program individual or program screen when they are updated. So just look for that email and that'll give you some more information. And this video has been recorded and it will be listed on our tutorial videos page on our website. And so that is where you'll be able to find this. Thank you again, everybody. If your specific question, like more pop up, make a list of those questions and give us a call. We are always happy to help you with any concerns and questions that you might have. So thank you again. I hope you have a great rest of your day and have a great tax season. Thank you.